Good afternoon, Americans. This is your favorite alien speaking on Sunday, February 24th. Me and my friend Bubba here are just looking at the afternoon. It's about 62 degrees here, nice and sunny, a little windy. Bubba found a fox here, so we can tell President Trump that, quote, the wall does not work. Because not only do we have fat cats, but hey, we got foxes. So they're in the hen house. Anyway, I wanted to do a small video here and dedicate it to the fact that there's a lot of talk all over the political and people there, reparations to the African Americans for slavery, to the American Indians for the way they got treated. Reparations, huh? And the way that people get incarcerated when they're innocent, and you got what's known as the Innocence Project that's been freeing out people. How about the people who's been killed for miscarriage of justice? So here's a video on that part, Americans. A good example of that is the Lindbergh kidnapping of March 1932, that they supposedly kidnapped Charles Augustus Lindbergh's son and Anne Morrow's son. Then they found his body in May of the same year. Because it's 1932, you must take into account the prevalent views and the political climate and the policing at that time, which was vastly different than it is today, almost 90 years later. There was no policing as you know it today then. The FBI wasn't called the FBI, yet anyway. It was just called the Investigative Bureau, I think is what it was called. But there was no cross state lines, because remember they found him in New Jersey. Or he was kidnapped from New Jersey. Anyway, and then they convicted Mr. Hopman of it in 1935, killed him in 36. Well, the good thing, Americans, is that was at that time period, if you were a heavy family and you had kids with disabilities, that was a no-no. I mean, it ruined your family name. You can just look at President Coolidge, his son, was serious addictions to him, and nobody ever mentions Calvin's son, but he died, and nobody ever mentioned it during his lifetime, ever. That was a no-no in those days. Well, how about if you saw Lindbergh, he was always crazy. And he was at the top of his game in 1932 because he was number one. Lucky Lindy, remember? His support of Hitler hadn't come up to the thing yet, and people didn't disassociate themselves from him. He was number one. So he had all kinds of people that came to his aid when kidnapping came along. So here's what I'm saying, Americans. Once and for all, exhume poor baby Lindbergh's remains and have him checked out by an ME. He can tell you what the cause of death was and whether there was any or no disable to the poor boy. Because that's what I think happened, is that they wanted him to be, when he died, they knew he was going to die, so they had to kidnap him, create all this, and then when he died, find a scapegoat, i.e. Bruno Hauptmann. Unfortunately, like Mr. Franks here in Georgia, Leo Frank, remember him with Fagan case back in 1915? It's the same thing. It's here in Georgia, and they're looking for who was the actual responsible people for her death. It wasn't Mr. Frank. He was just a scapegoat, the same thing that Bruno Hauptmann was. And having a name like Hauptmann in German at the time, 1936, hey, Hitler was in power, and, it just snowballed there. But anyway, This is what I'm saying, Americans. Find out what happened. Exhume the poor boy and find out once and for all, yes or nay, and give the descendants of Mr. Hoffman, sorry, we tried, or sorry, we made a mistake. Thanks.